My neighbor caught me by the arm on the landing outside my door, and the look on her face stopped me cold. Edna is 78 years old and has lived across the hall from me for 11 years. She is not a dramatic woman. She does not gossip. She keeps her door closed and her business to herself, and I have always respected her for it. So when she grabbed my arm that Tuesday afternoon in March, I knew whatever she was about to say was not small. "Lorraine," she said, keeping her voice low even though the hallway was empty. "Do you know who comes to your apartment every Thursday?" I thought I misheard her. "My son visits on Sundays," I said. "Sometimes my daughter-in-law calls ahead and—" "Not Sunday." She shook her head slowly. "Thursday. Every Thursday, around 11 in the morning. A man and a woman. They let themselves in with the key." I stood there on the landing of the Whitmore Arms, the building I had lived in for 14 years. And I felt something shift underneath me the way the ground shifts in a dream. Not quite real, but completely terrifying. "That's not possible," I said. "I only gave one spare key to my son." Edna looked at me with the steady, sorrowful patience of a woman who has lived long enough to know that the things we say are not possible happen every single day. "I've seen them 3 times now," she said. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. "I'm sure." I thanked her. I went inside. I put my purse down on the kitchen table and I stood in the middle of my own living room. The living room where I have read 10,000 books and watched my grandchildren learn to walk and spent quiet evenings with my late husband, Walter. And I tried to make sense of what she had told me. I could not. My son Derek was 41 years old. He worked in commercial real estate outside of Columbus. His wife Amber taught 2nd grade. They had 2 boys, ages 7 and 10, who called me Grandma Lou even though my name is Lorraine. I loved all 4 of them. I trusted Derek completely. He had always been a responsible, steady man, not warm in the way some sons are warm, not the type to call just to chat, but dependable. A man who showed up when it mattered. At least, I had believed that. I started paying attention to small things I had previously dismissed. A ceramic cardinal that sat on the second shelf of my bookcase had been in the wrong spot for weeks, facing the window instead of the room. I had assumed I moved it myself and forgot. A folder of old tax documents I kept in my desk drawer had been slightly out of order the last time I went looking for something. I had assumed I left them that way. My winter coat, hanging in the hall closet, had been pushed to one side instead of centered the way I always hung it. I had assumed the cleaners put it back wrong. I was always assuming, always explaining things away. My husband used to tease me about it. "Lorraine," he'd say, "you could watch someone walk off with the silverware and find a reason to excuse them." He meant it affectionately. He did not mean it as a warning. But standing in my living room that Tuesday, I wondered if I'd been excusing things I should have been questioning for a very long time. I am 67 years old. I am not forgetful. I taught high school English for 31 years, and I ran a classroom of teenagers on nothing but structure and calm authority. I balanced my own checkbook long before my husband died, and I have balanced it every month since. I am not a woman who loses track of things. But I'd been losing track, small amounts here and there. $20 I could not account for. A $30 withdrawal I did not remember making. I had told myself I was getting older. I had told myself I was tired. I had told myself these things so many times that I had started to believe them. What Edna told me on that landing cracked the story I had been telling myself wide open. I did not confront Derek. Every instinct in me wanted to call him immediately, to demand an explanation, to give him the chance to tell me I had misunderstood everything. But something made me wait. Maybe it was 31 years of teaching, of learning that when you accuse someone before you have the full picture, they close up and you lose the truth entirely. Maybe it was just fear. I am not too proud to admit it was probably both. That week I went to the library, the actual library on Fairfield Avenue, not the internet, because I did not want anything searchable on my home computer, and I asked the reference librarian to help me find information about small indoor security cameras. She was a young woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she pulled up 3 different models without asking a single question about why I needed one. I appreciated that more than she will ever know. I bought the one she recommended from a hardware store 2 towns over. I paid cash, It was small enough to fit inside a decorative birdhouse I kept on the bookshelf beside my front door. The birdhouse had belonged to my mother, and no one who visited would think twice about it. I spent one evening getting the angle right, testing it on my phone, making sure it captured the front hallway and the entrance to the kitchen without showing anything a stranger would have reason to move. Then I charged it overnight, set it to record motion activated, and I went to bed. Thursday morning, I woke up at 6 and spent 2 hours convincing myself I was being paranoid. I made coffee. I read 40 pages of a novel I could not concentrate on. At 9:45, I put on my coat and my good walking shoes, picked up my tote bag, and drove to the botanical garden on the east side of town, which is where I go when I need to think and cannot think at home. I walked for an hour and a half. I looked at the early spring plantings without seeing them. I sat on a bench near the water feature and watched a sparrow bathe itself in a shallow stone bowl, and I thought about my son who had a key to my home, and about whether I was about to destroy my relationship with him over the paranoid suspicions of an old woman who had lost track of some petty cash. That is what I called myself, in my own head. An old woman. It shamed me even as I thought it. At 12:15, I drove back home. I sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes before I went upstairs. I made myself a sandwich I did not eat. At 3 o'clock, I connected the camera to my laptop and opened the recording file. There were 47 minutes of footage. Derek let himself in at 11:03. He was not alone. Amber was with him, but so was another woman I did not recognize. Somewhere in her mid-30s, dark hair, professional-looking clothes, carrying a leather tote bag that looked like it cost more than my monthly grocery budget. They moved to my apartment like they owned it. Derek went directly to my desk in the second bedroom, the room I have always called the study, where I keep my filing cabinet and my computer and the small safe Walter bought the year before he died. Amber went to the kitchen. The other woman stood in the living room and looked around slowly, methodically, the way a person looks at a space they are considering purchasing. I watched Amber open my kitchen drawers one by one. I watched her go through the folder of coupons I kept clipped together near the stove. I still clip coupons. My daughter-in-law has always found this mildly embarrassing and leafed through them like she was looking for something specific. I watched her open the cabinet where I keep my rarely used china and run her hands along the bottom shelf. I watched Derek sit down at my desk, open the bottom drawer, and remove the small box where I keep my checkbook. Everything I thought I knew about my life rearranged itself in about 4 seconds. He opened the checkbook. He looked through the register. Then he took out a pen, his own pen, from his own jacket pocket, and he wrote something. I could not see what from the angle of the camera. He put the checkbook back. He closed the drawer. He straightened the items on the desk to the way they had been, with the careful attention of someone who has done this many times before. The woman with the leather tote bag took photographs of my living room on her phone. They were in my apartment for 47 minutes. When they left, Derek pulled the door shut gently behind him and tested the handle to make sure it was locked. I watched that footage 4 times. The 4th time I was not crying anymore. The 4th time I was simply watching with the focused, cold attention of a woman who had been a fool and was done being one. I called my bank the next morning at 9 o'clock sharp. The customer service representative, a patient young man named, well, I will not use his real name, but he was kind, walked me through my account activity for the past 8 months. There had been 7 checks cashed that I had not written. The amounts ranged from $180 to $340. Total, just over $1,800. They had all cleared without any fraud flags because the signatures were close enough to mine and the amounts were small enough not to trigger automatic review. Close enough to mine. I've been signing my name for 67 years. Someone studied it. I asked the representative to flag the account and to hold any further check activity pending my review. He walked me through the process. I thanked him, hung up, and sat very still for a long time. Then I called my attorney. Her name is Carol. No, I cannot use her real name either, but she has been my attorney since Walter and I bought this apartment building 14 years ago, and she is the kind of woman who, when you call her and say, I need to speak with you today, says I have an opening at 2 and does not ask unnecessary questions on the phone. I drove to her office that afternoon with the laptop and a printed summary of my bank findings. She watched the footage twice. She looked at the bank records. She was quiet for a moment. You haven't spoken to your son about this? No. Good, don't. She set the papers down. You said the woman with the tote bag was photographing your apartment? Yes. You, real estate agent, she said immediately. They're assessing it. My guess is someone is planning to argue at some point, maybe not soon, maybe years from now, that you need assisted living or a guardian, and they're preparing for what comes next. I had not thought of that. I'd been so focused on the checks that I had not seen the larger picture she was describing, and when she described it, I felt a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. I was not being robbed of $1,800. I was being robbed of my life. We spent 2 hours in her office that afternoon. She contacted a forensic accountant she trusted. She referred me to a detective agency she had worked with in elder financial abuse cases. She told me, quietly, that this was not as unusual as I wanted to believe. She helped me draft a request to my bank for full documentation of all activity going back 2 years. She told me what to do and what not to do, and when to do it. How long? I asked, when we were almost finished. She looked at me steadily. 4 to 6 weeks to build something solid. 4 to 6 weeks of pretending I knew nothing. 4 to 6 weeks of speaking to my son on the phone, hearing his voice saying, "Fine, Derek, everything is fine," while I sat inside the evidence of what he had done. 4 to 6 weeks of being a patient, measured woman when every part of me wanted to be something else entirely. All right, I said. It was the hardest thing I had ever agreed to. I am not going to tell you those weeks were manageable, because they were not. There were nights I did not sleep. There were Sunday phone calls with Derek where I held the receiver and listened to him tell me about the boys' baseball games and his commute, and Amber's classroom project, and I answered in complete sentences and said goodbye, and hung up and sat in my kitchen in the dark for a long time afterward. Once, about 3 weeks in, he asked if I was all right. "You sound tired, Mom," he said. "I'm fine," I said, "just the weather." "You should get out more," he said. "It's not good to be alone all the time." I thought about the footage on my laptop. I thought about the real estate agent with the leather tote bag. "You're right," I said. "I'll work on that." The forensic accountant found $20,240 in total, not $1,800 as I had initially calculated. There were transactions I'd missed. A debit card charge linked to an account I had forgotten I still had open at a second bank. The detective agency obtained security footage from that bank's ATM, showing Derek using a card I had not authorized and had not known was issued. More than the money, though, was what my attorney found when she dug into the background of the woman with the tote bag. She was a licensed real estate agent, as Carol had suspected, working for a firm that specialized in senior transitions, a polite term for helping families move elderly parents out of their homes and into care facilities. She had been brought in, the evidence strongly suggested, to assess the value of my apartment and the contents, which I owned outright. Walter and I had paid this place off 17 years ago. They were not stealing petty cash. They were preparing to take everything. The morning the police arrived at Derek's office in Columbus, I was sitting in Carol's conference room with a cup of coffee I could not drink. She had told me they would call when it was done. I sat with my hands folded on the table, and I looked out the window at the parking lot below, where a woman was loading grocery bags into a minivan with a cheerful deliberateness that seemed to belong to an entirely different world. Carol's phone rang at 9:47. Derek and Amber were arrested at his office. The real estate agent was picked up at her firm. The charges included financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery, and fraud. Ohio takes elder financial abuse seriously. The prosecutor had told Carol privately that she intended to pursue the maximum. Carol drove me home. She walked me to my door, which felt like too much. But I did not tell her that. I unlocked my apartment, my key, my lock, my door, and I stood inside for a moment before I took off my coat. The birdhouse was still on the shelf. My mother's birdhouse, with the little camera no longer inside it because the police had taken the equipment as evidence weeks ago. I had gotten used to its absence. The birdhouse looked smaller without the purpose I had given it. I thought about my grandsons, 7 and 10 years old, and none of this was their doing. I thought about Thanksgiving and about Christmas and about what I was going to say to them and when and how a child begins to understand that the people who are supposed to protect you can fail at it in ways that change everything. I did not have answers for any of that. I still don't. Not fully. The trial took 4 months. My attorney was present throughout. I testified once, for 2 hours, and I kept my voice even the entire time because I had decided before I walked into that courtroom that I was not going to give anyone watching the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. I had already done my falling apart privately, in my kitchen and my bedroom, and one very difficult afternoon in the botanical garden where the sparrows bathed. Derek was sentenced to 18 months with additional probation. Amber received probation and mandatory community service. The real estate agent who had, it emerged, done this before with another client family received the harshest sentence, 3 years. The judge said something I have thought about many times since. She said that preying on someone's trust and their age simultaneously was not a crime of opportunity. It was a crime of calculation. It required someone to look at another person's vulnerability and decide it was a resource to be harvested. I have thought about those words often. The restitution order required Derek and Amber to repay the full $2,340 plus legal costs. I do not know if I will ever see that money. I find, to my own surprise, that I care about it less than I expected to. What I care about is different now. I still live in my apartment at the Whitmer Arms. Edna is still across the hall. We have coffee together on Friday mornings now, which we did not do before. And I am grateful for the friendship I might never have known we could have if she had not stopped me on that landing. I started volunteering twice a month with an organization called Compass Elder Advocates, which provides free legal information and referrals to seniors in Franklin County who suspect financial abuse. I was not asked to do this. I found them on my own. About 6 months after the trial, when I realized that what I needed was to do something useful with what had happened to me instead of only sitting with it. The woman who runs the organization, a retired judge in her 70s, looked at my background and my experience and said, "We've been needing someone with your patience and your reading of people." I did not tell her that patience had been hard won, or that I had once stood in my own living room arguing with myself about whether to trust my own perception of reality. I just said I was glad to be there. My grandsons know that their parents made serious mistakes and that there were consequences. Their maternal grandmother, Amber's mother, a woman I have always liked, is raising them while Amber completes her probation. I see the boys twice a year now, carefully arranged through their grandmother. The older one, who is 12 now, asked me once on a video call whether I was angry. I thought about that question for a while before I answered. I told him, for a long time, but angry isn't something you can stay forever. You have to decide what to do with it. What did you do with it? He asked. I told him about Compass Elder Advocates. I told him about Edna and the Friday coffees. I told him that I had taken something that was meant to diminish me, and I had refused to let it, and that sometimes refusing is the bravest thing you can do. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's pretty cool, Grandma Lou." I laughed for the first time in what felt like a long time. I am 67 years old. I live alone in an apartment I own outright. I clip coupons and I visit the botanical garden and I read more books than any person probably needs to. I have learned, the hard way, the worst way, that love does not guarantee safety and that the people closest to us are capable of the things we least want to believe. But I have also learned that a neighbor can stop you on a landing and change your life, that a librarian can help you without asking why, that an attorney can sit across a conference table and make you feel, for the first time in weeks, like someone is standing with you. None of those things are small. I used to take them for granted. I do not anymore. The birdhouse is still on the shelf. I never moved it. It belongs there, and I have decided it always will. The birdhouse is still on the shelf. I look at it every morning when I walk past to make the coffee, and I think about what it cost me to put it there. Not the price from the hardware store, but the real cost. The weeks of silence. The Sunday phone calls. The way I had to hold myself very still on the inside while everything I thought I knew was falling apart. I used to believe that love was its own kind of protection. That if you raised someone with enough steadiness, enough patience, enough of yourself, they would carry that into how they treated you. Derek proved that wrong, and the hardest part, the part I have had to sit with longest, is that the failure was not sudden. It was built slowly, one small decision at a time, each one a little worse than the last, until the person I thought I knew had become someone capable of sitting at my desk, in my home, with my checkbook in his hands. That is what choices do. They accumulate. Derek did not wake up one morning and decide to betray his mother. He made a smaller choice first, and then another, and then the next one was easier, because the one before it had already been made. That is how people end up somewhere they never planned to go. And it is why, when I look back, I do not spend much time on the anger anymore. The anger was real and it was necessary, but it was never going to teach me anything new. What teaches me is the question underneath it. How do I make sure I keep becoming someone I respect, even when the people around me are not? What saved me was not luck. It was Edna stopping me on that landing. Her integrity, her willingness to say a hard thing to a neighbor she did not know well, when it would have been much easier to say nothing. It was my own refusal to explain away what I was seeing. For a while I had been doing that, chalking things up to age, to forgetfulness, to the general fog of living alone, and I think there is a particular kind of courage required to stop doing that, to say, I am not confused. I know what I know. That is not arrogance. That is just the quiet determination to trust yourself, even when someone else is working very hard to make you doubt it. The intelligence I am most proud of from those months is not anything dramatic. It is the small, careful things, going to the library instead of searching at home, paying cash, saying nothing to Derek while I built the full picture. Those decisions required me to slow down when everything in me wanted to move fast. They required me to think more clearly than I had in years, under more pressure than I had felt in years, and to keep my head when losing it would have been so much easier. And the outcome, Derek's sentence, Amber's probation, the case against the real estate agent, none of that was an accident. It was the direct result of every careful step I took and every careless step I refused to take. The world does not always deliver justice. I know that. But when it does, it tends to reward the people who did the hard, unglamorous work of building something solid. I think about my older grandson sometimes asking me what I did with my anger. He is 12 and he is trying to figure out who he is going to be. I hope something in what I told him stays with him. Not the drama of it, not the hidden camera or the courtroom, but the simpler idea underneath it all, that you can be hurt badly and still decide what kind of person you walk out of it as, that the decision is always yours to make, no matter what someone else has done. That is the only thing I know for certain. The rest I am still working out.